This is Mind to the Forest, a podcast of the Louisiana Forestry Association. Hello, I'm your host, Jeff Zeringue, media specialist for the LFA. In Mind to the Forest, we talk about all things forestry. Forest landowners, loggers, and wood manufacturers such as lumber, paper, or pellet mills all play an important role in the conservation and management of forests for the important renewable natural resource it is. Managed forests offer more for wildlife and water protection, so the LFA advocates to keep forests as forests. This episode of Mind to the Forest is sponsored by First South Farm Credit. First South is your premier rural lender. With over 100 years of financing timber and agriculture, they have the expertise you're looking for when financing rural property. If you're looking to purchase or refinance land, call your local First South Farm Credit office or find them online at firstsouthland.com. We're joined by Dr. John Fleming. He is the state treasurer for Louisiana, and we visited with him about tax issues and the potential for tax law change in the state. At times, Dr. Fleming expresses his political views, which are not necessarily the views of the LFA and its members. We have with us John Fleming, Dr. John Fleming, who is a former congressman. He is now the state treasurer of Louisiana. You've got quite a list of bio stuff because you've been around for a while, and looks like you've got a lot of accomplishments.
Well, if you live long enough, you'll have a long bio.
You're a Meridian native?
Yes.
Alum of Ole Miss?
Yes.
Nobody holds that against you, don't worry.
Thank goodness. Well, that's because our team hasn't done well against LSU.
So far, okay. Okay. That's also where you got your medical degree?
Yes.
Okay. You did a residency in family medicine is what I was reading. Was that when you were in the Navy?
Yes. The military has excellent training programs for doctors coming out of medical school. Mm-hmm. So I took that opportunity to do my training, and I'm board certified, have remained board certified. We have to be retested in our certification. So I'm a board certified family physician, and I served 6 years in the Navy as a family physician. I was stationed 2 years on Guam.
Wow.
Delivered a lot of babies on Guam, some of them during hurricanes.
Really?
Oh, yes.
Wow.
Which is very interesting because they got to be delivered whether there's a hurricane or not. Of course, they don't even call them hurricanes. They call them typhoons out in the Pacific. But nonetheless, after 6 years in the Navy, I brought my little family to a little town in North Louisiana, Minden, Louisiana, Webster Parish, to set up a practice. They said they needed a doctor there, and I wanted to get a fast start. We did. Practice was busy immediately. I got some additional providers, and the practice continues even today, even though I don't practice medicine regularly. Mm-hmm. I do from time to time. But after several years of medical practice, I decided to branch off into some other endeavors. So that's sort of the transition between the U.S. Navy and, of course, setting up private practice and landing in Louisiana, where I came as a result of, seeking a practice opportunity.
Your first foray was that corner of Webster Parish?
Yes, my first.
And then into politics, right?
Exactly. My first political venture was running for coroner, and I won. But to be honest with you, it wasn't much of a campaign. I did have an opponent, but other than putting a few signs up, people don't really want to hear speeches from somebody who wants to be a coroner. So I didn't really have to politic in the classic sense.
Well, I don't know if this is correct. It seems like I remember from my old reporting days that if there's a doctor on the ballot for coroner, he wins by default if the opponent is not a doctor. So you ran against another doctor?
Yes.
Wow.
What you say was true then. It probably is still today, is anytime a physician, a medical doctor runs for coroner, or more than one, one of them is going to win. Nobody else can qualify unless there's not a doctor. But there are a number of parishes where there are non-medical people who are actually coroners. Now, you might say, well, that's odd. Well, first of all, a coroner, for the most part, is not the same as what you see on TV. What you see on TV are forensic pathologists who are generally the coroners in big cities like L.A., New York City, things like that. But really, in most towns and parishes in Louisiana and other states, you don't really need a forensic pathologist as your coroner because most of the duties have nothing to do with pathology or dissection of dead folks. It has to do with the administrative part of healthcare. So I would investigate rapes, potential homicides, suspicious deaths, along with law enforcement, of course. And we would make determinations whether it was natural or not, whether there needed to be an autopsy. Also, involuntary admissions for psychiatric purposes, that was a responsibility too. So we were busy, but I had deputies. I had a bunch of deputies. So they did a lot of the administrative work for me. And if we did have a body that required an autopsy, we sent them to a forensic pathologist, usually in Shreveport.
Okay. So from coroner to congressman?
Yes.
How did that work?
I was a coroner in the 90s, and but really going back to the 80s, I started my medical practice in 82. Long about 1985, after going through all of the, the demand that you have to do to set up a medical practice, which means you got to learn how to run a business. You need to know how to read a financial statement and all that. I became quite interested in that and decided, well, if I can do this for a medical practice, perhaps I could do it for a non-medical entity. So I opened up the first Subway restaurant in North Louisiana. Back then, it was a newbie company. There were only 1,000 in the whole country. Today, there's 21,000 in the whole country.
Yeah.
But opened up the first Subway restaurant, which I opened in Shreveport. We eventually built up to 35 units, which we have today. And I really enjoyed that experience, being an entrepreneur, being able to apply some of the creativity, how we could establish ourselves in the marketplace, how we could be competitive, how we could make profit, how we could hire people. We still, in that and my other companies, we still employ over 350 Louisianans today. So that was very interesting to me and really quite fulfilling. I've really enjoyed being a business owner.
So one of the few Congress members who knew how to run a business and make a profit?
Perhaps. There are members of Congress who, for instance, own dealerships, car dealerships. There's one gentleman who he invented, I think, the first alarm system for automobiles, to prevent cars from being stolen. And he's like a multimillionaire and so forth. So no, there are entrepreneurs up there, but I would say for the most part, most members of Congress are people who perhaps had just a regular job before they ran for Congress and were not entrepreneurs. But there are entrepreneurs and even inventors. I have friends who served up there who actually had inventions that were registered.
Cool.
You see people from all walks of life.
You were also one of the founders of the House Freedom Caucus.
Right.
What is that?
Well, one of the problems I incurred, and I found out later that some of my colleagues were incurring, is as a conservative Republican, I went to Washington expecting to serve with my Republican colleagues to bring about conservative policies. And I came to Congress at the same time that Barack Obama was sworn in as president. And of course, he brought a lot of progressive policies. So you could see the battle lines beginning to build, which are even stronger today. There's more division among Democrats and Republicans in Washington than ever before. But it all kind of started with Barack Obama and the Republican Party at that time. So there were things that my Republican leadership were, I think, rolling over too quickly and too easily when it came to policy decisions. For instance, the Iranian deal, that has allowed Iran to continue to develop their nuclear weapons system and to actually allow them to have money. Well, some of our leadership was really going along with that. And so those of us that opposed that, because we did it on an individual basis, we were sort of called out from the group and we were penalized in ways. We were taken off committees, prevented being on certain committees. Even we had opponents from the same party who would be backed against us and running for re-election. I had colleagues that lost their re-election because they were out of favor with the leadership. And I just felt like that, as many of my colleagues that I'll mention in a moment, felt like that, look, the legislative branch of government works like this. Your constituents hire you, that is, they elect you, and then you elect your leadership, and your leadership is accountable to you, as opposed to the executive branch where you have a president who is elected by the people, but everybody below the president answers to the president, not to the people. So the president answers to the people, but the representatives that you send to Washington, they answer to the people too, not to their leadership. But with Nancy Pelosi and the Democrat side, that changed. So a group of us came together, 9 of us, and some notable figures. Ron DeSantis from Florida, Jim Jordan, of course, who's head of Judiciary Committee now, Mark Meadows, who became Chief of Staff for President Trump. We came together and created the House Freedom Caucus. And the purpose of the Freedom Caucus was to gather together and we could unify ourselves to oppose bad policies that our leadership would bring about. But we could protect each other, because if you have a speaker or a leader of your party who's going to take you off of a committee or do something else, run somebody against you, well, your friends can step in and help you out on that. And we ultimately pushed John Boehner, the speaker at that time, our Republican speaker. We pushed him out of office. He retired as a result of our coming together, a group of about 40 congressmen. And it's still very active today. It was the one group during the prosecution, I guess, or persecution of President Trump over the connection with Russia, the Russia conspiracy and all that proved not to be true. Mueller investigated that for 2 years. It was never proven to be true. It didn't happen. And the people who stood up the most for President Trump at that time was the House Freedom Caucus. And so they are continuing to be active today, even though I'm not in Congress any longer. They stand up for truth and justice. And as you know, under President Trump, and now that former President Trump is now running for office once again, everything has been thrown at him, from lawfare to civil suits to criminal suits and all these kind of other things in between. And he's withstood it all. In fact, just withstood a bullet that came and grazed his ear. But the Freedom Caucus is there to stand up for people like President Trump.
Well, you served in the Trump administration as well. I think you were Deputy Assistant Secretary for a little bit, then Assistant Secretary of Commerce and Economic Development, and then right toward the end of the administration, you served as Deputy Chief of Staff for the President.
Right. After my 8 years in Congress, I ran for Senate. It was 2016, the same year that John Kennedy was elected. He won the election. We're good friends. After 8 years in Congress, I transitioned over to the Trump administration, and I served both in Health and Human Service. Then later, I led the Economic Development Administration. That's the federal equivalent to LED here in Louisiana.
Okay.
And frankly, LED in those days, under the previous governor, did nothing. I mean, I used to work with all kind of states from my federal position, but I never heard from Louisiana. I don't know what those guys were doing, but we just never heard from them. But in the last year of the Trump administration, I was brought over to be Deputy Chief of Staff, working with Mark Meadows, my colleague from the House of Representatives. And that was in the peak of the pandemic. So I had some very interesting experiences while I was there. Only 10 steps away from the Oval Office, serving an entire year, and got to spend some good quality time with President Trump. Even my wife and I were invited to Camp David with others to kind of spend a little more intimate time with the president. And really, it was a great experience. He's a fantastic and charming man. Unlike his persona that you see on TV, he speaks in a very calm, low level. He's always very flattering and complimentary to people around him, but always in control.
So now you find yourself as treasurer for the state of Louisiana. Tell us a little bit about what encompasses working as treasurer.
Well, there are 3 main functions of the treasurer. First and foremost is to invest the taxpayers' money to get a good return. Just putting money into a bank account actually shrinks your buying power because of inflation. And that's true of our budget as well, the state budget. So we have to invest it to keep up with inflation and hopefully even do better. So in the last 5 years, we've netted $400 million in investments of the taxpayer money, and the money sent to us from Washington, federal money, mostly COVID money, but hurricane money and other things like that. Mm-hmm. So that's the first and foremost, maybe the primary thing. Secondly is the treasurer is the chairman of the bond commission. And really the staffers in the bond commission are actually in the Treasury Department under the treasurer as well. Okay. So what is a bond commission? The bond commission has oversight over debt through usually bonds, not always bonds, sometimes just regular bank debt, but any type of political subdivision, a parish, a city, even a small village, any sort of debt that they incur. It may be for such things as a water system, a sewer system, a bridge, a street, whatever. They have to get approval by the bond commission. Now, the bond commission, while I head it as treasurer, there's also members from the administration, from the Landry administration. There's also members from both the House and the Senate represented there. Mm-hmm. And what we do is we look at this indebtedness, and we have to approve it because if for some reason a political subdivision gets in over its head in terms of its debt and it can't service that debt, then we may have to administratively take over that town. In fact, we have towns right now that we're actually in control of. We have to appoint a mayor, and we have to pay their bills until they get back on their feet. So these are things we want to avoid. Right. Even though that's one of our responsibilities, we'd rather have cities, towns, parishes do well on their own so we don't have to do that. And sometimes we turn deals down. From a money standpoint, from a quantity standpoint, the biggest deals, the biggest money that we have to approve is from the Louisiana Housing Corporation, which is, of course, affordable housing. But what we found in since my tenure began in January is that it doesn't appear that the cost of construction is being looked at very closely. So we found some of these deals that we could not approve. And as a result of that, we've entered some reforms. And one main reform is that now we have appropriated to us an individual from the auditor's office, the legislative auditor's office, who will benchmark all the construction costs, who's an expert in construction cost, who has all these charts and things. So if somebody comes in and they're applying for a loan that we have to approve, and the cost per unit is prohibitive or above a certain range, then we'll send them back and tell them to sharpen their pencil and make sure they come in with the right numbers.
So you're the loan officer of the state for public bodies, it seems.
In a sense, because somebody's got to watch that. There's not competitive bidding for these deals. So you can well imagine how cost overruns can occur. And ultimately, taxpayers are responsible for these. The third thing that we do, which is by far the most popular program, is the unclaimed property program. And that is any sort of dollars that are owed to citizens, which could come by way of perhaps a bank account that you've lost track of, or maybe a family member who's passed away and that bank account needs to go to someone. The bank is turning it back over to the state. Could be an inheritance from an aunt or an uncle that you've lost track of, but they left you some money, or maybe money left through probate. So there's millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars, in fact, that are owed to individual citizens. In fact, it's said that 1 in 6 Louisianans are owed money through unclaimed property.
Well, I looked, but I didn't see my name in any place so far.
That's unfortunate. We'll see if we can get your name in there. But, it's funny. Whenever I speak to groups, I will tell them, look, go to lacashclaim.org and look up your name, lacashclaim.org. And I was giving a speech the other day, and a gentleman raised his hand after a few minutes, and he said, I just looked up my name. I'm owed over $500. Wow. So it's a real deal. In fact, here's what happened in June. June 13th, we mailed out over 27,000 individual checks amounting to over $5.1 million.
Wow.
To people that didn't even know they were owed money and never came to our website. What we did is we matched their names against the revenue department.
Mm-hmm.
And because, see, oftentimes their refunds and things that for whatever reason don't get cashed or don't make it to the right address. Wow. And so we just simply did a data match, and we mailed out those checks. And I sent out an alert. I said, please deposit the money. This is not a scam. This is not a promotion.
I can imagine some people might think that.
Exactly.
Man.
And oftentimes it's not a bunch of money.
Yeah.
But sometimes it is in the tens of thousands. And I'll give you an example. There was a gentleman that was owed over $200,000 that we had to try to track him down. Come to find out, he was homeless. And
wow.
Last I heard, he's doing quite well.
Well, somebody plunked down $200,000 in my banking account.
Yeah.
I'd like that, but well,
sure.
that's a heartwarming story.
Yeah.
Now, in all this, some folks are probably thinking, okay, so what does this have to do with forestry? Because our show, Minding the Forest, deals with forestry. Well, let me first say that there's been a lot of talk about a constitutional convention, or maybe the legislature coming in and talking about changing the tax law, things of that nature. My question is, where's the treasurer fit in all of this? And if there's anything that the Treasurer's Office provides for legislators. Now, we did find out from La Politics that House Speaker Philip DeVilliers will not have a special session in August. So that's off the table right now. But for anyone who's followed Louisiana politics, it doesn't mean the tax issues are off the table indefinitely.
Right.
And so it's something that we're likely to be revisited by. So as treasurer, especially it sounds like with bond commission, how does that fit in with taxes in the state?
Well, I would say there's no direct connection between the bond commission and taxes, but I definitely have a lot of ideas on taxes. So let me describe what I'm talking about here. Louisiana is, of course, suffering from lack of population growth, and ultimately our economy has not done well. But let me tell you, the economy of this country is moving to the south. It's transitioning. The future of the economy is not in California with the dot-coms anymore. They're moving to the south. In New York State, the financial districts and things, they're moving out. They're moving to other places. Texas is even talking about starting its own stock exchange. So the South is the future for the economy. The South was once very great. The richest states in the Union back in the 1800s were in the South. They were not up in the North. But we're seeing a revival of that. And the reason, I think, has to do with the fact that high taxes in these states and ridiculous regulations. California now requires fast fooders to pay $20 an hour, and they're closing down right and left. And so people are left now without food options. So the point being that why are people coming to the South? And the reason why they're coming to the South is because in many cases there's low or no personal income taxes. The quality of living is better. The climate's better in many cases, certainly than in the North. So every state in the South, including Texas and Arizona, are doing quite well. The one state that is not in on this great deal is Louisiana. Louisiana the economy is not doing well. We're still losing population. We've lost 2 congressional districts as a result of our loss of population over the modern times. In fact, if you go back to around the early 1900s, the state of Florida and the state of Louisiana had similar populations and a similar number of districts. Today, Florida has many more people and many more districts. They're growing while we're actually shrinking.
Well, they got the snowbirds and they've got the retirees from the eastern seaboard that has helped them out.
But the one thing that's in common with all the states that are doing best is no personal income tax. And Tennessee does not have a personal income tax. They also have low property tax, so there's not an exchange there. Now, Texas has no personal income tax. They do at times have higher property taxes, But that's mainly driven by the fact that people are moving there. They're driving the property values up, which increases the taxes. They recently passed a law to lower their property taxes. Florida, no income tax. So first and foremost, emblematic of a state that really wants to grow economically is to do away with its personal income tax. So I'm very much in support of repealing the personal income tax in Louisiana. And we need to lower corporate taxes. We need to lower taxes in general, because what we've learned, both under Reagan and then under President Trump in 2017 with the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, is that when you lower taxes, you see revenues go up, not down. So what you want is more people working and paying taxes, but at a lower tax rate. And they're willing to do that if you don't burden them with too much tax. But people today are at their kitchen table making decisions about moving to another state outside of the South. And when they do, the first thing they ask each other, well, which state has no personal income tax?
Yeah.
And when they find out Louisiana does, they're making other choices.
We look politically at that, though. When you remove some taxes, one of the first things that they think about, okay, where we have dedicated taxes. And that has been a source right. of funding for some of the times that Louisiana's revenue has lulled. So in the forest industry, there's a forest productivity program. This program allows smaller forest landowners to get help in keeping their land as forests. And we had talked earlier before we came on and about the all the carbon storage and carbon climate change and all that stuff that's going on, and how important forests are to that equation. Well, when you are able to help the landowners who don't have these great swaths of land, like a corporation or anything like that, and as a matter of fact, corporations don't qualify for that program. And when you can help them keep those lands forested, that's a huge benefit to Louisiana. Right. So when those programs are looked at, how do you view how when tax law is being considered? How do you view those programs?
Well, I guess the lower tax structure that occurs because of forested versus developing land, I think is a good thing, because obviously, if you're going to have forested land, at some point you're going to cut that, harvest it, and replant, and the numbers have got to add up. So I don't see any reason why we shouldn't maintain that structure. A lot of people think, and this is a misnomer, that if you cut taxes like personal income tax, you have to raise it someplace else. That's not true. There are two things that can happen if you do it right. Number one, you should cut spending anyway. And I can tell you as treasurer, we spend a lot of money on stuff that adds no value to the state. I can just tell you that off the bat. And I suspected this to be true, but I didn't really know it for sure until I actually got into office. One of the proofs of this is we've been through hard times and good times when it comes to income. And whenever we go through hard times, like in the Jindal years when our revenues were down and we were emptying out our reserve funds, the legislature wasn't wasting money because they had to spend money on the vital needs of the state. But in the last several years, under our previous governor, Governor Edwards, where we were getting a lot of COVID money, they were spending like banshees. And we're having to process those expenditures today, and there are a lot of them. So spending goes up with income, and it goes down with income. Well, that should be a signal to us. Why don't we spend correctly all the time? And that way, when we have extra money, we can, again, give tax relief. We can also pay down our debt. See, we have our pension programs around the state have had debt on them since they were begun back decades ago. And instead of putting the extra money that we've received from the federal government in recent years against that, what we've done is we just go and spend it. We divide it up among the various parishes, and money goes out. And when we do that, that means that we have to hang on to the tax structure that we have today, which is really hurting our businesses and our jobs. We have, as I understand it, one of the most colleges and universities per capita than any other state. We are spending a lot of taxpayer money to educate our young people, but then they can't find a job, so they take that education we pay for and they go to other states and take those jobs. We need to change that. We need to keep them here and have good jobs, but you got to have people who are willing to invest their money. And when they look at the equation, are they going to go to Texas or Tennessee to invest their money where they can get a higher return, or are they going to come here? In fact, they decide to go those places. In fact, we've had a number of corporations that started and were headquartered in Louisiana that have left this state to go to those states. So we're not even keeping the businesses that we create. So my point is that if you lower taxes, you must lower spending, excessive spending, the unnecessary spending. And then number two, what happens is you attract people and their investments, and therefore you have more people, but they're paying at a lower tax rate. And that's how Tennessee and Florida and Texas are doing that. And that's how Arkansas and Mississippi are starting to do that.
Imagine the differences of opinion of what's necessary spending, or as many as there are legislators in Baton Rouge.
Yeah.
So you had mentioned earlier in the Bond Commission that there are some small towns, villages that you've had to take over because of bond debt. Logging, a huge part of the forest industry, vital part of the forest industry, really is essential for rural areas. The mills, we look at it as a three-legged stool. You have the landowners that provide the resource. You have the loggers who can harvest that resource, and the mills that can process it into products that we use every day.
Right.
So most of those are in rural areas. The importance of the rural economies can't be understated in those three areas. Absolutely. So if there are towns and villages that you have to take over, harming that industry would seem to be a detriment to those towns.
Well, certainly if they're generating revenue for those towns, we wouldn't want that, because again, the state does not want to run cities. And again, the Bond Commission's responsibility is not to necessarily make sure that a city is generating enough revenue for itself. We are part of the approval process when they pass a tax, when they have a tax election. Mm-hmm. It has to be approved by us as well, but first it has to be approved by the citizens. So I'll give you an example. There's one small town, it only has like 150 people, but they have their own water system. And the standards for water systems are much higher today than they used to be. And this one city I'm referring to, I'm not going to tell you the name of it, of course. They have a F, A to F scoring for their water quality. It even looks dirty when it comes out of the faucet. So that's how bad the water system is. And they wanted a bond of $40,000 to try to fix it. But it was only going to be a Band-Aid solution. It wasn't going to fix it. And they were going to have trouble supporting it with their low tax revenue. Mm-hmm. And then ultimately they couldn't get the bond passed to begin with by their citizens. They tried 2 or 3 times. And we said to them, well, look, let's sit down and talk about it and find a solution. Number one, there are plenty of grants out there. Mm-hmm. So let's apply for grants. They go, we don't have a grant writer. Okay, we'll help you out with that. Have you considered merging with another water system of a bigger town, and you could spread your cost? Well, we hadn't really considered that. So we try to work for a solution that's usable. So sometimes granting a bond is not the right solution. And in this case, it wasn't. So we try to work with the municipalities on finding themselves in the best situation we can. And we connect them with other people and other sources and resources that they don't necessarily know about. But life is tough for rural areas. You can't support hospitals any longer in small towns like you once could.
Yeah.
People are moving away for the reasons I just mentioned. They're going to Texas. So what you end up with is retirees and people on fixed income. So the sales tax revenues and things like that go down because there's few businesses, just enough to support them. So we're kind of in a death spiral in a lot of our rural areas. And again, if we could rebuild industry, bring back manufacturing and many other kind of things that used to be healthy in Louisiana, we can revive a lot of these small towns and villages that were once really doing very well.
In the search for revenue, oftentimes the legislature will consider, certainly like we had talked before, the dedicated taxes, but also sales tax exemptions. Louisiana has a pretty high sales tax overall, when you count the state and local sales taxes. In Alexandria, for example, it's almost 10%. It is 10% for all practical purposes.
Right.
So that adds a lot to the cost of things. Absolutely. Loggers, as we talked earlier, they have the benefit of getting a state sales tax exemption. They're not exempt from local taxes, but they're exempt from state taxes, where they can get a 4-cent discount, if you will, off of when they buy new equipment, when they get their equipment worked on, when they buy fluids or parts or things like that. So that's a huge help to them, because their equipment, quite frankly, is hugely costly.
Right.
It really is very costly to do that. A small operation would get over $2 million in equipment very quickly.
Right.
So tax exemptions will be another area that could be looked at. So as far as treasurer watching money, talking about eliminating some income taxes and things of that nature, how do the tax exemptions fit in with all that?
Well, tax exemptions are a problem, and here's why. It creates a patchwork within the system. It's very complex and complicated. And oftentimes when people want to invest into our state or they want to move a business here, they go, I can't even figure this out. Mississippi, it's simple. Arkansas, Texas, simple. We're just going to go there and we'll forget Louisiana. So it's not just the burden itself, but it's the burden of the accountants and the army of accountants that you often have to figure all this out and to maintain it. What we should do is simply probably reduce exemptions, but reduce the tax overall. So whatever the loggers are paying now, even with the exemption, it should be that or maybe lower than what it is. We should just lower that burden on everybody. Again, the rising tide lifts all boats when it comes to taxes and the economy. So if you take away the burden on these loggers and businesses in general, their profits are going to improve and they're going to all do better. And that's a good thing. The other problem the loggers have is insurance, which is a problem for the entire state. But loggers especially have this problem. And out of the session, there was no real reform of our insurance.
It seemed to be an opportunity, but it didn't make it through.
Right. I won't get into why that is. That's something that I'll let everybody, all the listeners here, study.
Topic for another time.
But needless to say, there's a lot we can do that wasn't done and wasn't accomplished. And I would urge everyone who hears this podcast to reach out to their state rep or state senator and the governor and urge them, push them, because that's critical. Remember, I told you we need to cut taxes to boost our economy. We also need to get our insurance rates back in reasonable rates, and we can do it. We just need to pass the kind of laws necessary to do that. And then, of course, we need to improve education, but that's another topic, I guess, for another day. But there are some things that have been done there, like the ESA program, where money is going to follow the kids to the schools they choose. School choice. That's a good future for our state. So we got a lot of work to do. But when it comes to the loggers' insurance, I know the loggers want to have captured insurance, which would save them a lot of money. And there are attempts. We've got $3 million set aside in the Treasury ready to go with that. But the loggers themselves have not been able to organize enough, because some will have to step up with their own money and their own signatures to make this happen.
Okay, you'll have to explain for me what's captured.
Captured insurance is that you create your own insurance organization just for you. Mm-hmm. I'll give you an example. We have something called Lamico Insurance Company in this state. It's designed specifically for doctors, and I'm a member of it because I'm a doctor. Lamico insures doctors against malpractice, and they've been part of insurance reform over the years to make sure that the costs don't get so high that we begin losing doctors, and they've done a great job. So all of the money that comes in is used to compensate people who are harmed, but also just the insurance in general, whatever the insurance needs are. Nobody's making a profit from that. It's just that the patients in Louisiana and the doctors are all benefiting by keeping those costs low, which stabilizes our health industry. In the case of the loggers, they want to do the same thing. They want to have what's called captured insurance, which means self-insurance, mm-hmm. where they come together, all the loggers put in their money into a pool, and from that pool, they can insure themselves. And then you bring in another layer like Lloyd's of London or some big super insurer. Mm-hmm. It clicks in if your losses go above a certain level. So if you squeeze out the profits that would go to a commercial insurance company, you have more money for your own coverage. And there are attempts to get that done, and I support that. But the loggers themselves have not been able to get all of that put together in a way that would do that. But if they can, it would definitely save them money and enhance their profits.
It's an interesting proposition because it would seem the risk is greater, but then again, it could offer a lot of change in behavior for some of the operations who, we refer to them as bad actors in the industry, right. And every industry has them.
Right. Well, and that it does kind of act as a watchdog to penalize those who don't follow the rules and the laws. But again, we do have a tort problem in this state. We have far too many lawsuits, far too many settlements for far too many dollars. And as a result of that, we have an insurance crisis, and we need to fix that. And it's only going to come through insurance reform that's brought by the legislature, and they've not stepped up yet. So as I say, you put enough pressure on our representatives, and they'll do the right thing.
At the risk of stepping in it, how do you get lawyers to reform tort system?
Well, again, if you mean lawyers who are in the legislature, having been a representative myself for 8 years, nothing is more important to the typical legislator than their own political survival, right? So if you tell them you're not going to vote for them next time, they'll listen to you. Trust me, you'll get their attention. And now, there are lawyers out there, of course, who have a vital investment in not reforming these laws because there are plenty of lawyers who make a lot of money. How do I know this? Because every other billboard has a lawyer ad. So if you're injured in some way, and look, I believe we should properly compensate people who are injured or they receive damages to their vehicle or whatever. But it would appear, since we and Florida are the two highest cost states when it comes to insurance, that there are some things we could do that would improve that environment, but still properly compensate and adequately compensate lawyers.
Try and wrap this up a little bit. So if we're looking at the rural economy of Louisiana, what's the best thing we can do to, I don't know if I want to say improve it, but at least to sustain it, especially because that's where forestry is in rural areas of Louisiana?
Well, traditionally what has sustained rural economies have been family farms, but family farms are gone. We only, for the most part today, have corporate farms, except for some type of farming like crawfish and things like that. And the reason is...
And tree farming.
Tree farming.
That's yes. A family endeavor for many of them.
It is. Well, the reason why you can do that on family level is because it doesn't require the expensive labor and machinery that some other type of farming requires. Mm-hmm. I mean, once you get them planted, You have some things to do, of course, but it's not like soybean and cotton and things like that require, intensive. So that's the reason why we have corporate farms today is it's automated. You can get the cost per unit down much, much lower. And so a family farm can just not compete with those kind of things. So what do we replace that with? And I would say to you that if we improve our economy by bringing investment back into the state, then we can go back to automated machinery, automated manufacturing, advanced manufacturing, many other things. So I could see where used to there would be in a small town in Louisiana a paper mill and a bunch of small family farms. Now could have a car manufacturer there paying big bucks, mostly with robots, but who controls the robots? It's people. They're still required a lot of human hands to do that. It's good work, it's clean work, it's safe work, and we could bring back manufacturing once again. Arkansas and Mississippi, Tennessee, they've got lots of manufacturing. We've lost most of our manufacturing in this state, particularly automotive manufacturing. So all of this can be brought back. So there is replacements in a rural economy, but we're going to have to improve, again, our taxes, our insurance, and our education to make that happen.
Well, considering rural economy and manufacturing mills or manufacturers as well, we have been blessed with some new facilities in Louisiana. One is, well, actually two mills now, is an endeavor through two family companies. The Hunt Forest Products folks and the Toco Industries out of Canada have come down and they built a mill and they're operating it together. They've worked out a system that works well for both companies. So well that they have a second mill in Bienville Parish that is undergoing, I think they're doing some testing right now before they go full bore. And then another example is Canfor. Canfor comes from Canada. It says Canfor Southern Pine. And they built a brand new facility. Interfor, another Canadian company that has come down, and they purchased the former GP mill in DeQuincy. They're up and coming and up and going, and they're doing very well. So the future seems that a lot of foreign investment coming to the South, in particular. Now it seems Louisiana's turn. Right. How do you make that better?
Well, a lot, I'd say going back about 20 years ago, maybe even beginning 30 years ago, we lost a lot of our mills, our wood mills, for two reasons. Number one, we just don't use paper like we used to because of computers. Number two, again, the thing about manufacturing is, like anything else, it has to be modernized, and that's very expensive. Again, that's where tax law comes in. If you have 100% immediate write-off, you're going to get a lot more investment in new machinery and things like that when it comes to those things. Also, the products have changed. You mentioned wood pellets. That's something that was, I don't think was a common product 30 years ago, but that's now correct. It's becoming very common. I know there's a mill, I believe it's in northern Bossier Parish. I believe it's
in Plain Dealing, Plain Dealing. That's another Canadian company.
And I'm hearing that the real estate industry is going crazy up there because they're hiring so many people that they're having difficulty finding homes to buy, which is a good problem to have, right? Anytime you have a lot of employment opportunities, whatever problems come from that are welcome. So I could see a total revival, considering that Louisiana is one of the few states in this country that still has a lot of timber and a timber capacity, where we could have a whole revival. We could end up with as many, if not more, paper mills, wood mills, than what we've had in the past, with modern facilities, robotic facilities and things like that still hire a lot of people and would be great for the economy. So I could see a revival. I think that would be a great opportunity, along with, again, other forms of manufacturing. Absolutely. We just have to find applications, use cases that are going to be very helpful in all this. The other thing I'd tell you is that AI is coming hard, artificial intelligence.
Right.
And what I understand about that is it's going to double our demand for energy in the near future, which means we're going to have to build more energy-producing facilities and ways to produce energy from that. And that may involve wood products as part of the solution of that. But we're going to be up against another energy crisis on the demand side, and there's talk of a facility, a energy and maybe an AI facility in Northeast Louisiana. We'll see how that turns out. So it could be very exciting going forward, but we got to get our act together.
Dr. John Fleming, still a doctor.
Still a doctor.
And also state treasurer. Thank you so much for joining us.
Sir.
We appreciate it.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you for listening to Mind of the Forest, a podcast of the Louisiana Forestry Association. This episode of Mind of the Forest was sponsored by First South Farm Credit. First South is your premier rural lender. With over 100 years in financing timber and agriculture, they have the expertise you're looking for when financing rural property. If you're looking to purchase or refinance land, call your local First South Farm Credit office or find them online at firstsouthland.com. If you'd like to learn more about sustainable forestry and the LFA and its programs, and how you can be part of an organization that supports landowners, loggers, and wood manufacturers in the state, go to laforestry.com. You can send comments or suggestions to me by email at jzeringue@laforestry.com. That's jzeringue@laforestry.com. Or check out the show notes to find out our contact information. You also can subscribe to Mind of the Forest on your favorite podcast app, and be sure to tap on the notifications button so you know when the new podcast has dropped each month. Really appreciate you doing that. And remember, at the Louisiana Forestry Association, we're Mind of the Forest for you.